You are listening to a summary of The Future of Feeling, a book by Caitlin Ugolik Phillips.
Empathy allows people to love and care for one another, and differentiates human beings from machines. Yet as people's dependence on technology continues to rise, empathy appears on the decline. In this timely text, journalist Caitlin Ugolik Phillips asks if developers might use the technologies that cause these problems to fix them. She found she's not alone in pursuing this question. Phillips's research takes her, and the reader, into a growing movement made up of developers, journalists, educators, advocates and others who see empathy as an essential component of future technologies.
Empathy allows people to love, raise children and help their fellow human beings. Genuinely feeling someone else's experience is impossible. Imagining how someone feels is as close as you can get. Cognitive empathy means intellectually grasping another person's mental state. Affective empathy refers to your emotional response to what another person is feeling. Empathy differs from compassion in that you share an emotion with people, rather than feel an emotion for them. Empathetic people handle stress better, are more at ease showing their feelings, and are more successful in business. In an increasingly technological world, the human capacity for empathy sets people apart not just from animals, but also from machines. Does technology alter people's ability to empathize? The connection may be difficult to quantify, though researchers are exploring how screen time alters people's brains and their ability to communicate. Young people growing up with digital technology become adept at sharing digital messages, but their communication often lacks substance. Increased social media use has a negative effect on people's sense of well-being. Screen time is increasing in every demographic. Kids aged 8 to 10 look at screens for about 6 hours a day, 11 to 14-year-olds spend about 9 hours a day in front of screens, and most adults spend 10 hours a day looking at digital devices. Researcher Sarah Conrath found that, in 2010, college students showed 40% less empathy than their 1979 peers. MIT researcher Sherry Tickle calls the decrease in human empathy the new silent spring, an allusion to Rachel Carson's 1962 exposé about the negative effects of certain kinds of pesticides. Interaction on social media lacks the nuance, body language and context of person-to-person exchange. Social media platforms become battlefields of barbs, insults and attacks on those with different ideas, but they feature little genuine communication. People in various fields question what role empathy will play in the development of new technologies. Technology plays an ever-increasing role in people's lives, creating a digital world. Experts across disciplines are exploring the role of empathy in that new world. A growing movement of teachers, futurists, engineers, social scientists, journalists and others say it's possible to use the same technology that created the empathy problem to solve it. The Internet's connectivity enables people worldwide to share conversations. Initially, the virtual meeting of minds was enthralling and exhilarating as various experts and ordinary people shared their thoughts, experiences and ideas. However, the Internet also provides a platform for harassment, scamming and other abuse. Gamified exchanges on social media become combative as participants seek to win at all costs. With the advent of social media, conversations took on a gaming aspect. People enter conversations intending to win, rather than to learn or listen. Unlike an actual debate, in which participants follow guidelines, those who contribute comments can hijack an exchange and make everyone play by their rules. These trolls claim victory if their target responds with frustration, anger or emotion. Even people with good intentions often forget the humanity of other participants in the heat of an exchange, viewing them as adversaries on subjects about which they are passionate. In these exchanges, people rarely change their minds. Issues such as trolling, public shaming, and doxing drew attention before the 2016 U.S. presidential election, but the election brought them to the forefront. Winning became more important than listening, and the lack of empathy in online gamified conversations contributed to increasing national polarization. Celeste Headley, author of We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matter, asserts that tech is not the problem. It's a tool like any other. To make use of that tool to promote empathy, researchers are developing algorithms, apps, and tools to keep online exchanges more civil and empathetic. In the Conversations with People Who Hate Me podcast, host Dylan Marin invites people who have insulted him on social media to speak with him on the record. Participants agree to ground rules, like being willing to listen and being vulnerable. Often, these chats end with participants respecting each other's right to a point of view, even if they still disagree. Such conversations foster empathy because responding to stories is human nature, and spoken exchanges engage and resonate more than digital communications. Empathy education, while not new, has evolved to include apps, games, and virtual reality (VR) experiences. Schools have taught empathy and kindness for decades. Studies confirm positive, long-range changes in social behavior in response to such training. Many apps and games are now focusing on empathy education, though parents and teachers worry about increased screen time and the potential misuse of the data that developers collect from users. Video games can foster a sense of community, but kids don't develop the social-emotional skills they gain from life experience. Apps such as Homes by TinyBop accelerate children's empathy learning curve by letting them virtually explore homes around the world. VR has tremendous potential as a tool for arousing empathy and engaging emotions. Virtual reality (VR) describes immersive experiences, including augmented reality (AR) and cross-reality (XR). VR bridges the virtual and physical worlds via a headset people wear to have virtual experiences that vary from watching 360-degree videos to room-scale 3D engagement. Instagram or Snapchat filters that add animal features to your face exemplify AR. In his TED Talk, filmmaker Chris Milk called for using immersive technology to increase empathy. His VR film Clouds over Sidra placed viewers in a Syrian refugee camp. His idea of using VR as an empathy machine prompted advocates to try to create other experiences to help people better understand the lives of refugees, the differently abled, and others. Planned Parenthood produced a VR movie, Across the Line, using actual video and audio of protesters' harassment outside of health centers. In the computer-generated environment, users hear real clips of shouts, such as, "You're a whore and maybe your parents should have aborted you." While such movies seldom change minds, viewers can gain a more empathetic perspective. A 2018 study found that VR triggered increased empathy and created a greater probability that viewers would take subsequent political or social action. However, responses to the VR experience tracked with users' attachment to the subject or their predisposition to an empathetic reaction. African-American social scientist Courtney Cogburn experimented with using VR to push people away from hashtag activism and toward real action. Her VR film, 1000 Cut Journey, allowed its target audience, white liberals, to experience life as a young African-American male, so they could appreciate the differences in their lives. Quantifying the connection between experiencing VR and acting on the feelings the experience produces is difficult. But VR is an effective tool for arousing empathy and building connection. News reporters use VR as a powerful vehicle for telling stories. Journalists are experimenting with VR to tell stories in a form called immersive journalism. Nani de la Pena, the godmother of virtual reality, produced a series of moving pieces, including Hunger in LA, which simulates standing in line at a food bank, and Project Syria, which places viewers in Aleppo during an attack. People responded positively to her stories, but journalists have raised concerns about manipulating audio and images for VR stories, especially during the era of fake news, when people's trust in the media is eroding. Virtual reality is here to stay as a content creation tool. Editors and producers always play a role in what the public sees or reads. People understand that the final product of any news story contains additions and omissions, by necessity. A 2017 Google News Lab study found that viewers retain the emotional memory of VR experiences, though they might forget the editorial details. Principled journalists can use VR judiciously to engage people without manipulating their emotions, proselytizing, or exerting undue influence. As empathy emerges as a desirable workplace skill, empathy training is becoming more prevalent. Movements such as #TimesUp or #MeToo highlight the problem of sexual harassment incidents in the workplace. These encounters range from non-consensual touching to rape. While the issue of harassment is not new, renewed focus on the problem has triggered a wave of public outcry. Many companies already require so much diversity and inclusion training that new workshops on these subjects elicit a yawn or a shudder. Empathy training might be more effective. Empathy has become such a desirable workplace skill that 20% of companies offer empathy training for leaders, and many consider empathy when hiring. Companies such as Translator use technology to subject participants to the experiences of women, gender nonconforming people, the differently abled, and people of color. Research on empathy training's efficacy is slim, but early paradigm and Google studies show it can help. Empathy and compassion are essential to providing quality medical care. Stressed out medical professionals sometimes must block out patients' pain in order to function. A survey of medical students showed that empathy declines rapidly in the third year of med school and remains low through graduation. But healthcare professionals who can retain a sense of compassion provide higher quality care. Tech programs can address this empathy problem. Medical professionals already use medical simulations products and VR for practical training. Now, many use teleempathy programs, such as Simples, to feel what their patients feel, such as a Parkinson's patient's tremors. For example, wearable symptom transference technology is in the works for other conditions. Users now can experience a medical condition firsthand thanks to VR. Rita Addison produced the VR experience, Detour, Brain Deconstruction Area Ahead, that simulates living with a traumatic brain injury. Virtual reality also provides a useful distraction for people undergoing treatments. For example, dental patients can wear a VR headset during dental work to travel virtually to a beach or mountaintop. Children respond positively to Smiley Scope, a VR headset that lets them explore an underwater world while undergoing a procedure. Companies such as Google are developing AI and VR software for children with autism to aid with social skills training. Users hope the next generation of AI developers will learn from their predecessors' mistakes and create more empathetic, inclusive technology. As digital devices increasingly ensnare parents' attention, children see less modeling of empathy and other social skills. Developer Vivian Ming's app Muse gives parents suggested activities they can carry out to help boost their children's social and cognitive development. Therapeutic technologies simulate empathy and understanding. For example, The digital avatar Ellie has a proven record of assessing and helping veterans' psychological stress. In 2018, news broke that the consulting firm Cambridge Analytica misused data from millions of Facebook users to promote Donald Trump and Brexit. Other horror stories of abuse and exploitation of user personal data also emerged. Gawain Morrison of the empathetic tech company Synsum believes these revelations were necessary to spark change and regulation. Hopefully, future developers will avoid the mistakes of the creators of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The lack of women, minorities, people with disabilities, or members of the LGBTQ community in the creation process may have led to AI programs that reflect the biases of their mostly white, male Silicon Valley tech developers. Today's developers are working to make the next wave of AI and technology innovation more empathetic and inclusive.
You're listening to a summary of Gods of Management, a book by Charles Handy. Philosopher Charles Handy compares today's dominant management styles to the qualities of 4 mythological Greek gods. Drawing archetypal inspiration from Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus, Handy breaks down the subtle differences that inform competing approaches to management. He argues that today's managers face making the transition from a hierarchical corporate Apollonian culture to a more diverse democratic one. In this evergreen business classic, Handy posits that increased complexity and individualism will fuel a reign of new managerial gods. Okay, first, let's hear takeaway 1. The mythological Greek gods embody contemporary management archetypes. The ancient Greeks saw their gods as more than theological deities. Each god represented specific interests and values. People decided which gods they would serve according to their sense of alignment with each deity's symbolic emphasis. Today, leaders can choose among 4 different management styles in corresponding corporate cultures represented by the mythological gods: Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus. Each god symbolically embodies different leadership views of influence, power, human motivation, change, and the future of work. Now let's move on to takeaway number 2. Leaders must understand 4 Greek god-inspired cultures. Use the power of these Greek god-inspired cultures to help you navigate different contexts. First, the club culture. The organizational culture that Zeus represents relies on divisions of labor with those closest to the organization's center, wielding the most influence and power, and all workers reporting to a central authority. Zeus-like cultures are pervasive in entrepreneurial organizations, investment banks, brokerage firms, and certain startups. This culture values speed over quality. In such organizations, empathy hinges on trust and affinity. Second, the role culture. Apollo's organizational culture embraces rules, flowcharts, and order. Roles have more clout than personalities in this bureaucratic culture, which values predictability and stability. Life insurance companies, state industries, and local governments embody Apollonian culture. Third, the task culture. Athena's culture calls on teams to identify problems, find solutions, and allocate resources in a continuous process. Athena, the warrior goddess, leads a loosely connected network of commando units, mostly autonomous teams working together toward a shared mission. Companies that thrive on variety or that are expanding, such as advertising agencies, consultancy groups, and those launching new products, adhere to this culture. And fourth, the existential culture. Dionysus, the hedonistic god of wine, rules existential cultures that attract those who want to rule their own destiny. Here, unlike in the other 3 cultures, the individual doesn't serve the organization. The culture exists to support individuals. For example, when doctors, artists, attorneys, or architects work together, they cooperate to achieve individual goals. Managers have less status in such organizations, where people view them as capable of tackling unpleasant, necessary tasks as a housekeeper might. Great. So now we can move on to the third takeaway. Each mythological god has a different approach to changing and managing teams and to setting incentives. Each of the 4 cultures uses the power of thinking in different ways and has a distinct strategy about learning. For example, a Zeus-like leader is an intuitive thinker who learns quickly through testing ideas and making mistakes. Zeus's club cultures value learning through apprenticeship. Learning isn't an open activity, but is carried out secretively to avoid the appearance of weakness. Apollonian leaders are analytical, logical, sequential thinkers. They view learning as an acquisitive training process that prepares individuals for new roles. Athenians value continuous learning and team approaches to problem solving. They see areas that need improvement as problems to solve together. Athenian organizations value individual self-development, with team members often bidding for new roles. Dionysians tend to be flexible thinkers who prefer learning through experience. They resent anyone who tries to plan their future for them and oppose hierarchical thinking. Each mythological god represents different management approaches to influencing, changing, motivating, and rewarding teams. Zeus-like cultures enact change by replacing people rather than transforming them. Those who know powerful people wield the most influence. Power motivates Zeus, who rewards people by expanding their responsibility in networks. In duty-based Apollonian cultures, change means updating roles, structures, or systems. Leaders reward and motivate Apollonian teams by expanding their formal authority and bestowing the status symbols that accompany greater responsibility, such as expense accounts and executive cars. Athenian teams change when leaders persuade their team members to agree to change, with individuals finding motivation in serving a common purpose. To reward and motivate Athenians, give them opportunities for self-development, variety in assignments, and results-based paychecks. Dionysians resent those who try to influence them, so approach any change as a negotiation. They regard being creative and improving the world as rewards in themselves. Well, so far so good. Now let's listen to takeaway 4. 4 forces shape organizations and their cultures: size, life cycles, work patterns, and personnel. 4 factors influence your workplace culture. The first factor is size. Larger organizations tend to be more Apollonian because their leaders rely on formal control and coordination methods as teams grow to larger than 10 people and organizations become more impersonal. Second, life cycles. Organizations that cycle through change most quickly tend to be Athenian. These rapid-paced organizations prioritize problem-solving over administrative capacity. The third factor is work patterns. Organizations can work by following several different kinds of patterns. They can use flow patterns, such as assembly lines, that use one section's work as input for others. They can follow repeated copy patterns, as in branch banking or gasoline stations, and produce identical work in each separate section. They can select unit patterns for independently operating sections, such as independent small businesses. Copy and flow patterns work best in Apollonian cultures. Organizations that use unit patterns tend to be Zeus-like. But they can be Athenian or Dionysian when teachers or other professionals work in collaborative environments. And finally, people. The generation into which you were born, your early experiences, and your environment form your cultural expectations and preferences. For example, today's individualistic youth culture doesn't generally align easily with the role culture of Apollo. Occupations that require less education tend to prefer Zeus-like cultures, while those demanding higher education levels are often more Dionysian or Athenian. Differences in personality influence your cultural preferences. An individualist, for example, wouldn't enjoy working in a team-based Athenian culture. All right, let's now hear the 5th takeaway. National differences contribute to variations in corporate cultures. Organizations develop different default cultures, in part due to their social and national contexts. When social psychologist Geert Hofstede researched the cultural differences of various nations, including interviewing personnel in 40 countries, he concluded that national differences manifest themselves most sharply in how people perceive uncertainty, individualism, masculinity, and power. In short, it depends on whether people approve or disapprove of hierarchies. For example, in Austria and Germany, people tend to dislike uncertainty. They value equality over hierarchy, embrace stereotypical masculinity, and are wary of individualism, making their organizations appear more Apollonian. In France, by contrast, people tend to enjoy power, hierarchy, and individualism, while eschewing risk-taking, which makes their workplace cultures more Zeus-like. These are cultural generalizations. Not everyone with the same nationality will share the same views. Leaders can strive for balance by using management approaches each of the four mythological gods inspire. For example, many successful organizations in the United States make their more Apollonian cultures viable by incorporating the leadership qualities of Athena, Zeus, and occasionally Dionysus. Different types of organizations tend toward different cultural styles. For example, in schools and academic institutions, Dionysian and Apollonian culture elements vie for control with Zeus-like management. Each mythological god represents enduring traditions that serve different contexts. Organizations that balance them offer positive lessons. Okay, now for another takeaway. Apollonian cultures inspire resistance because they're too complex, alienate individual workers, and don't align with modern values. As individual imperatives such as increased personal choice disrupt organizational imperatives like corporate growth, the dominant Apollonian cultural model must contend with three facets of resistance. First, complexity. Critics argue that Apollonian structures are too big to properly manage complexity. Apollonian cultures tend to work best when routine work takes place in stable environments. They can fail when uncertainty overwhelms them. Leaders with higher levels of education tend to better cope with complexity and the requisite abstract thinking. The second facet is individual alienation. Apollonian organizations can prioritize roles, many of which are mundane, over the growth of the people who fill them. Some argue that money is no longer a sufficient incentive for working and that this is a good thing. And finally, shifting values. Societal norms and values are changing to favor Athenian and Dionysian cultures that support personal expression and collective action over Apollo's impersonal conformist culture. While many people now expect workplaces to be more democratic, Apollonian leaders tend to ignore democracy. Top-down decision-making may be more efficient, but Apollonian leaders should realize that workers in societies that lack scarcity regard the cost of efficiency as too high. Now we've reached the seventh takeaway. Apollonian domination is ending as Dionysus, Athena, and Zeus prove emergent. To remain relevant, Apollonian organizations must change to prioritize the needs of the individual. Using federalism as a model, combining interdependence and independence, successful future organizations will resemble cities of villages or smaller groups that work together toward a broader vision. Athenian and Dionysian values will become the new norms, so organizations that cling to rigid hierarchies and stifle debate won't survive. Imagine problem-solving Athenians, Dionysian professionals and craftsmen, and Apollonians working alongside one another with a Zeus-like center uniting them in a common purpose. Today's emerging corporate culture operates on the basis of management by consent. Employees expect to be asked to perform their jobs, not told. The term management seems dated. Many professionals dislike the notion of someone managing them, since it implies control or manipulation. Organizations should no longer view people as resources to deploy, but as valuable contributing individuals with inalienable rights. Okay, so now we can hear the eighth and final takeaway. Organizations must adapt to survive as they replace their dominant gods. Organizations are restructuring and adapting to survive, resulting in cultures that no longer favor their old mythological gods. Societal shifts underway include the move toward a more Dionysian society that values credentials or other evidence of continuous learning and retraining, the decline of long-term employment and the emergence of a more contractual economy, changes to norms surrounding ownership in the form of cooperatives or discounted shares for workers, and new paradigms or assumptions about the nature of work in society. For example, women dramatically change workplace norms as they gain power and influence. Leaders must not risk dystopian scenarios in which people endure increasing splits along socioeconomic lines. which divide those who work from those who cannot keep up. If your organization cannot envision change, your competitors or industry disruptors will overtake you. Well, that was a summary of Gods of Management, a book by Charles Handy. Let's recap those 8 takeaways one more time. Takeaway 1. The mythological Greek gods embody contemporary management archetypes. Takeaway 2. Leaders must understand 4 Greek god-inspired cultures. The third takeaway. Each mythological god has a different approach to changing and managing teams and to setting incentives. Takeaway number 4. 4 forces shape organizations and their cultures: size, life cycles, work patterns, and personnel. The fifth takeaway: national differences contribute to variations in corporate cultures. The sixth takeaway: Apollonian cultures inspire resistance because they're too complex, alienate individual workers, and don't align with modern values. Takeaway 7. Apollonian domination is ending as Dionysus, Athena, and Zeus prove emergent. And finally, takeaway 8. Organizations must adapt to survive as they replace their dominant gods.